Thank you for your so lovely presentation, Dr. Gillison. Um, and also, I don't think we can thank you enough for what you've done and your family, and also those missionary doctors and professionals done to this country. By reading your book, it actually is a very good lesson for me to know, just because it's a piece of history that I should have known for what had happened to that land. That's a very important part. There is a statistic data show before 1935, pretty much all the hospitals in China, of course, it's Western hospitals, are founded by some kind of missionary group. And today they're still operating as the top 100. Among the top 100 hospitals currently in China, almost half of them were funded at that time. So it's a very impressive statistic that I read when I was triggered by your presentation last time. And by reading your book, and I was amazed to find out when you talk about how the prisoners of war and prepare for their life condition, they put, even the food is the physical challenge they have faced at that time, but the next thing to food would be education. So that was pretty impressive. And then also the people that hold positions to help to get water. There are people at Shanghai Water Company. I think that's a water company. And then
that's right.
Shanghai Waterwork Inspection Department. And then there is one gentleman works for Asiatic Petroleum business. So it just tells me those folks are very highly educated, just like your family. They are physicians, they're businessmen, they're professionals. Those I think that contribute to that piece of land tremendously. It's amazing that you were considered, when your father's disappointment was that at the end, you were treated as enemy and to let it go out of the country, even though the climate changes and people change turns. So I would like you to comment a little bit about that much sacrifice that your family have done to the whole nation. You have almost 2 generations, and your grandmother, grandfather, your aunt, your uncle, one of your aunt and one of your uncle died in China when in their early ages, which, if they were in UK, they might have lived a different life. So how do you justify that, and would that cause any regrets later on? And for our audience, please type your questions for Dr. Gillison if you have any. Thank you.
I'll try and answer that first question of yours, but thank you for your kind comments. Again, I would say Bugandong to that. My grandfather and my grandmother separately, before they met each other, both had a conviction that they wanted to preach the Christian gospel in China, because China in 1880 had very little exposure to foreign influences, and they also wanted to teach medicine and pass on their medical schools. My grandmother was very shy, and she said, "I am no good at public speaking, but I hope to help the Chinese nation with my hands and my head in order to make them feel better, but more important, to teach Chinese people to become qualified doctors and practice medicine in their own country." So there was this very strong desire to go there. And my grandfather said to the missionary society, if you don't support me to go to China, I will find another missionary group to take me there. So they gave in and said, okay, we'll send you to China. The other thing, my father, you see, I think he was wrong in 1939 to go back to China, leaving two young daughters behind in a country when there was a war being fought. And I think he had learned so much. Look at those wonderful amputees and those people who'd had compound fractures. He could have provided very expert help in Britain when Germany was dropping bombs on the British people. But my father was convinced that God wanted him to live and work in Wuhan for as long as he lived. And therefore, he was convinced the German U-boats wouldn't sink our ship. Fortunately, he was right. But I think it was a matter of luck. So there was a strong conviction, especially in those days, of you had a mission to go somewhere rather than to earn money at home in the UK or in America. I think that it's that inner feeling in the core of their bones. And when that happens, whatever your philosophy or whatever your politics, it's what drives people onwards. Does that help at all, Lucy?
Of course, it helps great, because it gives us a vivid picture of what drives them to be there, to bear such a big sacrifice. Just like you said, not only financially, I know your grandmother's family contributed a lot. Her family is a very successful businessman in UK, and they donate quite a bit of money there. And then another thing is, sacrifice emotionally and left daughters, two of your sisters in UK when they were in China on their mission trip. That is a big sacrifice. However, I was pretty impressed by his attitude to his life. He wrote poems in the prison, and he also you reflected quite a bit of sense of humor there, and just say, even though the life there is harsh, and you kind of say, well, that prepared me for my boarding school better, and you always look at that positively. And also you compare, there was a classmate, mentioned you had a classmate that you met later on back to UK, came from the same prison in the war, but he viewed it differently. He doesn't like Japanese as much. He has that bitterness feeling in his heart. Yes. And that prevent him from, advanced him from his career. So that the mental status, I kind of pretty impressed by how strong that morale that you hold there. So could you please kind of elaborate a little bit about that? Would that because from religion, that's the belief from the God, or is that just from the human nature? How would you like to explain that and share that with us?
It's very difficult to say. It's a combination of several things. I have exactly the same story about two doctors who were at my medical school in London. Two of them went out to help provide medical care in Singapore. And unfortunately, from that disastrous battle in Singapore, 100,000 British and Allied troops were captured. These two young men who were doctors were captured with all the rest, and they survived to the prisoner of war camp far worse than the one I was, because the military prisoners were treated much worse than we civilians. They both came back to my medical school. One, they were the same age, they had the same training, they had the same experience. And just as you described with me and my colleague from school, One came back a broken man, and the other man said nothing. He just said the trouble with the Japanese is they did not know how to behave. He said nothing more about his war, which must have been a terribly gruesome story. So my answer is, it's not so much the matter of the experience to the people who have been through a nasty prisoner of war experience. It's the actual intrinsic nature of the person to which it has been subjected. I think it depends, and a strong religious faith certainly gives people additional strength. I'm sure of that. Is that okay?
Yep, yeah, that's very helpful, because I was pretty impressed that when you win the boxing game, the match, and you give half a blow to your opponent. I mean, I just kind of feel it's a very kind-hearted, but also it's a very smart strategy to survive in that harsh environment.
My mother nearly choked where she swallowed that bread, but she was happy to get it in the end.
Yeah, sure.
We've got a question from Henry.
Yes.
Yeah, Henry, go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Gillison, for the very nice talk. A lot of very precious content.
Are you in the barber shop?
No.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm
not.
That was a very good barber shop.
Okay. I'm kind of surprised to know your parents, and they were interested in staying in Union Hospital in 1949.
Yes.
I'm kind of wondering, any parties trying to keep you guys there in Wuhan at that time? See the hospital, you got a lot of friends over there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think they really wanted to stay, but of course the Korean War had started, so really he would have to be a prisoner of war in North Korea, maybe, or somewhere like that. It really was, and also there. You remember the Union Hospital? There were two superintendents, a clinical one. Yao Fong, his name was, a lovely man. My father really liked him. And another one whose name I can't remember, but he was the political superintendent of the hospital. He was, because the communist army had arrived, and there was a need to indoctrinate the nursing staff, the medical staff, the patients, because a new ideology had arrived. And therefore, they didn't want people of a different ideology. So there was quite a lot of pressure to push my father and other people away. My father was, one thing he was happy about is that he had a huge admiration for some of the staff. There was a young surgeon called Paul Chang, who later went to North Korea. And I was delighted to hear he was not killed. He was settled with his family near Harbin in northeast China. But there was a very good staff, and Lucy Ye, I think, Dong Song's boss, she was a new gynecologist at the Union Hospital. She died not so long ago, lovely woman. So really, my father said, if they don't want people of the wrong ideology, of the wrong nationality, okay, we'll go, but we hope we can come back. But there was a very strong nucleus. And Lucy Ye is a very good example, one wonderful woman, and her husband, of course, was an eminent cardiologist. So the answer is, I think, and also when the communists had actually fully taken over, their Chinese friends didn't visit the house where my father and mother lived in daylight, because they could have been accused of being imperialist spies. They could come at night so that they could come for a cup of tea or something like that. It's because there was an atmosphere of fear in those days, which I never felt When I have been on my 4 occasions to Wuhan recently, I have felt completely comfortable with, I didn't discuss politics, that I'll leave that to my prime minister. So there was a good nucleus left behind, and my parents and all other foreigners felt in 1950 they were a possible embarrassment or even liability. So they felt they should have to go, sadly. Does that answer your question, Henry?
Yes, yes. Thank you so much. Truly surprised because your guys' loyalty definitely is there. It's generations there now.
Yes.
So just can't believe that happened.
Well, you feel it in the air when you walk through the door. It's an amazing thing. Yes.
Right. Thank you so very much.
Yes.
Yeah. And while we're waiting for more questions coming in, I would like to share with everyone that 2 sentences I found very moving to me in Dr. Gillison's book. One sentence was saying, powerless as we were in Yangzhou, our loss of freedom was more physical than psychological.
Yes.
I think that's very well said. And every details that you described there, it just exactly reflect what you're saying here. Do you have anything more to comment about that and how you hold that strong morale to everyone, like assign each other a job, those kind of things? I mean, that's really well. And also the mortality was only like 6.6% in the place you were staying compared to 25% to other places. I think that the strong mental setting, I think probably help a lot. That's just my personal opinion. Would you like to comment about that?
I think you've really answered the question, Lucy. I think psychological torture is far worse than physical torture. I think I would be a weakling if I had clever psychology applied to me, especially at that age. But otherwise, what you said is true, and as we've said, it depends very much on the human being how things have evolved. Yeah.
Okay. There is one question from one of our audience, and say, have you ever met the president, next to your father? His name is Tu Dengbang. Have you get a chance to meet with that gentleman?
Say it again. What was his name?
Tu Dengbang.
Tu Dengbang. I don't think so. What faculty or what department does he come from?
Okay, let's unmute him.
People I know are Yilan Liu, who is the matron. She did wonderful work with the COVID infection. She was in charge of a whole unit with the COVID infection. And a lovely man called Hao Zhou, who works in the hematology department. Yes, there's Yoko Fong. And another one is Feng Gao, who works in administration. And they're 3 lovely people. And I do get correspondence from time to time.
Can you see my screen?
Yes.
I show the picture of the 2 people.
Yoko Fong, yes, I recognize it.
And actually, his surname is Fang, so it's Fang Keyao in Chinese. And the other one is called Wang Guangrong. It's the political one.
Yes.
And thanks Yinghan and 陈英汉老师提供的这个信息。英汉老师有什么要说的吗？
Yes,
yeah. And he provides information, and I'm going to let him in to say something about this.
Dr. Chen's question that so the question is, before 1949, what kind of financial status is Union Hospital? Is that a private hospital? Is that charity, or is that a government-owned hospital? Do you know anything about that?
Yes, I do know that until all the foreigners left the hospital, it was a private hospital where money came in from churches and friends in the UK and Canada and America, according to the nationality of the member of staff. But the hospital tried to run as an efficient business. For most of the time, if there were private patients, they would pay more than the cost of their stay, because there were always some free beds for patients who had no money at all. So it was semi-private, but also the hospital generated some income from other things. For example, they provided staff to run vaccination clinics for military staff. They provided some X-ray facilities from time to time. So it was partially privately funded by supporters in home countries, but also it tried to earn its own revenue as well. And it was often very frightening when they look at the balance sheets sometimes compared with others. But they managed, as you know, where there is a will, there is a way. People paid as much as they could, and it survived. So, but once all the foreigners left, then the communist authorities in Wuhan took it over and ran it as a state institute, and it is a very fine, solvent state institute today. So it's a change.
It sounds to me, yeah, it sounds like it's a mixture in a combination of charity, because you do provide that kind of sliding scale. I'll translate that into Chinese.
Yes.
协和医院当时应该算是一个私立医院，但是呢，同时呢又是一个有一点点是半私立半这个社会福利这样的性质。它是如果富人的话，他会多收钱；穷人呢，他会减免他们的这个医疗费用。同时呢，自己呢也通过就是提供一些疫苗的接种啊，或者是给军队啊提供一些 X 光这样的服务来稍微来盈利，然后平衡医院的开支，大概就是这样的。OK， 如果大家还有什么问题，也欢迎提。
另外他父亲他说到武昌那边去，因为武昌他们那边有一个就相当于现在的高干病房那样的东西，所以他给那边的高知啊或者那种非常有钱的人的私人诊所，从那边把钱呢赚过来以后，然后来支持协和这边的那个减免和福利，是这样的。
Very well interpretation.
Actually, I got a question from your book, and you said, like so many others of his missionary counterparts, this conviction took a precedent over everything, even the upbringing of his children. 就说就像当时的其他的一些那个神职人员一样的，就是到其他的地方布道的那些人一样的，他们把自己的那个对上帝的信任和布道看得比自己的孩子的那个成长更重要。Do you have, as a child, do you have any regret, or you feel they were not doing things right?
Well, I of course was not put in the same position. But I had two sisters. One is still alive. Maidie, who died, had no strong emotions about that. Perhaps being a little bit older, she understood. But Fran, my other sister, is still very bitter about the fact that she had to say goodbye to her family when she was 6 years old. To go into a country at war, she wondered whether she would see us again. And she was very badly affected by that. But really, the conviction by my parents that they must get back to Wuhan in 1939 was very similar, if I may say so, to the communist army in the days before before 1950, when in the books like The Long March and other books I have read about it, the ideology of communism was often made stronger than the love for their children. That sometimes that if it was a choice between the ideology of communism or family, communism came first. And I think the same was true of them.
Thank you. Yeah, I understand that. There's a celebration of 100 years of Chinese Party founding, and many of them actually sacrificed their family, their children, and also their own lives.
Yes.
Yeah, so I can understand that.
Yes.
But it's children, sometimes they feel very different.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So I can appreciate the bitterness of France.
Yes.
Yeah.
One sister still feels the same way now as she did many years ago.
Many years ago. Yeah. 所以也就是说，在那个中外或者是不同的理想的人或者信仰的人都差不多的。那个信教的人，他觉得上帝给他的任务比他的孩子的成长更重要。就像共产党人当时红军要为了共产主义的理想，把自己的孩子和家庭抛弃一样的。Any other questions?
They are also very polite.
Yeah, yeah. And also it's amazing that for you to mention that General MacArthur was in charge of Japan for like 3 years post-war.
Yeah.
And I read some article, some kind of memoir of that age. Actually, Japanese people loved him when he was in charge there, and it's quite interesting comparison to today's Afghanistan. You know, the US was trying to build up the infrastructure and try to do something, and they continuously ruled that area for 10 years after bin Laden was killed. But this withdrawal was kind of a lot better than what had happened before. Like when you said when you were in Japanese prison, you view that people there is quite different than the professionals you met in Chicago later on, and you saw the difference when people were civilized or entered the democracy and how people changes. But it's kind of hard to explain how come, you know, today's Afghanistan situation. I know it's probably these talks need to be happened between prime minister and the president, but do you have a comment about that?
I think it is much more complicated. There is talk that there was a fair amount of corruption in high places. I know that Afghanistan is a combination of 8 or 9 different tribal groups who they do not get on well with each other. But I have one little ray of hope. I think over the 20 years where so many people and young girls have been educated and have become lawyers and doctors, I have a feeling that the Taliban will find there are so many people who have tasted democracy, have tasted free speech, will be very difficult for them to suppress, anything like what happened before 20 years ago. So I think in the long term, I think good will come out, but I fear for the people who have been so helpful for the education of the young, the treatment of girls compared with boys, and the whole situation of international relations. I just feel there's going to be a very bad 4 or 5 years before perhaps a benign revolution will take place when you've tasted freedom, you definitely do want it back again. And I can't help feeling that. But I am no politician.
Yeah, we love that no politician things,
Yeah.
because that's more resonate way better to, normal humans like us.
Yeah.
So just this reflect what
That's
you said in your book. You also said, but what is freedom? That's a quote from Henry Coleridge. And
Yes.
say, what is freedom? Rightly and understood, a universal license to do good.
Yes.
I think that resonate to us, very well and strongly.
That's the acid test, I think.
Absolutely.
Teacher Chen has a question. Said, he was told your father spoke very fluent Chinese.
Yes. My father was said to speak Chinese very fluently, but he had a terrible Wuhan accent.
Yeah. 就是一口汉口话，汉口腔的
That
弯
is
管
so
的
cool.
普通话。
If we
Yes.
have a piece of his
Terrible.
voice, that would be wonderful.
Yes. If you were in Beijing, you would you had a good meal, you'd say 吃饱了. But if you were in Wuhan, you'd say 吃饱了.
That's
Yeah.
right, yeah.
Yes, it's quite different.
Right.
Mhm.
And he also named, your sister, the first sister, Mary, Mei Li, and
Yes.
your friend, sister friend named Lilian. Yeah. And your name is Ji Huafu.
Yes.
So it's apparently that he understood Chinese culture very well. The name he picks, just matches that culture at that time.
Oh, we
When
were.
you talk, sure.
Yeah.
You go ahead.
No, I just said we were very proud of our Chinese names.
Yeah. One question about you said cross the river by railway was
Yes.
very difficult, so use the ferries. But was there any bridge at all at that time?
Yes. Now you could cross by the railway easily because there was a very good Beijing to Guangzhou railway, and that was working well in 1939 when my family were there. But you had to pay a lot of money to get on the train on the Hankou side to get out to the Wuchang side. But therefore it's cheaper to get onto a ferry and cross the river that way because there were lots of ferries going back and fro. Now I looked at a map, there are about 10 or 11 bridges of all wonderful bridges going across the river around there.
Was then a physical bridge, or it's actually still by transfer the coaches onto some ferry-like things and carry those ferry-like coaches cross the other side and then start?
No, I think they went on the rail. They went straight across, no problem. At least in those times, unless the bridge was not working, then they might have to do it. But no, you could. The railway bridge was fine. I remember I went on that bridge all the way to Hong Kong, no problem at all. But to cross to Wuchang, it was better to catch the ferry.
Thank you.
That looks interesting.
Yes.
Sorry, I just say goodbye. I got something else to do. And Walford, hope to see you soon. Okay. Right.
再见，再见。
再见 ，take care。
舒迪，你有没有什么要补充的？因为你是这方面的专家。
我给他讲一下，现在刚在他的旁边，我又给他说啊 ，OK。
Okay, well, you've all been very polite and very accommodating. It's been a privilege to have a talk.
我听的 OK。
舒老师，
哎，
do you have
哎，
any?
我听见了，我没有什么补充的。我那个we can discuss later on about the Friends ambulance
Yes,
unit
we will.
in Wuhan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
with pleasure.
I would like to close to thank Dr. Gillison for today's time and presentation. I'm very humbled to express my appreciation of what to the contribution from our missionary staffs from generation to generation at that time. We are the beneficiaries of that Humanity Act. And by closure, I'd like to share this by Professor Yizhong Tian. The book that Dr. Gillison wrote, it's pretty much tell the stories. I think from humanity standpoint, a personal story, sculpts a human figure, and that human figure solidifies a piece of history. That piece of history carries culture at that time of the society, and the society culture interprets humanity. I think eventually everything ties to, humanity, our inner me, and that's what I would like to share as the closure of today's presentation. Thank you, Dr. Gillison. Do you have any other things to add? Yeah.
And 再见，明天会。
再见。
再见。
Okay. Have a great day, everyone, and have a great weekend.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.